Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two terrific poets with us today, Todd Colby and Joanna Penn Cooper. Todd will read first, and then Joanna. Todd Colby is a visual artist and poet who works in Northampton, Massachusetts, and Brooklyn, New York. Colby recently presented his visual art at Picture Room, Familiar Trees, BES Millerton, Platform Project Space, Andrew Edlin Gallery, Legion Arts, and White Columns Artist Registry. He has given readings at DIA Art Foundation, MoMA, PS1 or PSI, PS1 I assume, the Public Theater, Hudson Opera House, and the Poetry Project, among others. He is the author of 7 books of poetry, most recently, It's Okay to See Ghosts, Spiral Editions 2023. Here's a marvelous poet, Todd Colby. Welcome back, Todd.
Thanks so much for having me, Harry. I really appreciate it. I had so much fun last time, and it's great to have my good friend Joanna Penn Cooper here today too. I am going to be reading from my new chapbook, which is called Brilliant Juice. It came out from Sarah Lefsick is the publisher of it, and it comes out from ethelzine.com. And there's a limited edition of 75, blah, 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 blah. But I'm going to go ahead and start, and I'm going to read from this. The first poem is National Poetry Day. Remember when you did that thing? I remember when you did that thing, and it was pretty amazing. Maybe there's something we can do, like empty a mayonnaise jar and fill it full of buttons. The leaves are turning faintly gold, which reminds me that we're turning gold too as we disintegrate during wartime. I'll tell you what. Or maybe I'll just keep it to myself and hope you catch my drift. People will still love. A certain sense of civility matched the day perfectly. I was most funny when I wasn't trying to be. Sometimes I think I'm dying, and I am. 143 likes. Deep inside the sold-out day, people are trying to find satisfaction and maintain their wonder. In many cases, I don't know anything. Meanwhile, a heat dome is the beginning of the end of something good. The air conditioner sounds like a vinyl version of metal machine music. Caving in is better than being above reproach. The darkest, saddest, hottest summer is halfway over. The sun dips behind the high line at a new angle. More coffee never solved anything. The corpse flower blooms once every 9 years. Free sunlight, free water, fresh orange paint on the side of that monstrous building. Wee smidge. That sound you hear in Brooklyn is everyone really showing up for work. Needless to say, we are all a bit tired, like we wish it was the next day. You invented a revolution that only works for you. Willy Wonka was built on the idea of an heir or a legacy. Can't you see I'm burning? Out in the open, a deer wound vibrates. With the right bandwidth, it could be the 19th century. Everything is always happening at once, forever. This morning, I woke up and made a list of my top 10 worries as I rooted around in the junk drawer. All the water I use in a year would fill this apartment up to the ceiling twice. And then the people downstairs would wonder what I was doing up here with all that water. I am genuinely going to and fro in 3D. Pomegranate pucker. The mellow beauty of I don't know. Soothing someone is harder than it seems. A list of fluffy things, hard things, and purple things. August seems more like September since June felt more like July. The shepherds saw the cardinal fall and land on the tin roof with a bright ting. I'll always give you more than you asked for. I have chairs that you can fall over. Graduates receive iPads. A pond full of yawning orange koi surface for balls of bread. Pliable and fantastic. I think of everything you do as cat-like and elusive. Humming city, mutable traffic, gigantic rooms. There's a melody you can hum. Rookie strobes. Walk with a purpose. Recognize the luxury of doing almost anything for any period of time at any point ever. Post your journey, but make it hot. Start being mentholated. Give in to the urge to do something. An element of mystery does not absolve you. Practice the high technology technique. Nod at people citywide. Recognize the need for air to breathe. Know what a robot sees when it sees another robot. Do you know if there is an advantage to being among kin? Me neither. In the future, there will only be 15 of us. Let loose a civil bellow, rain showers, whatever. Don't go bananas in your house. Practice being impossible at all times. Nothing is delayed. Raise your hand if you have ESP. Start with yellow as a source of light. I have a little crush on your bullshit. The slow sparks of a quiet Saturday fueled by protein bars and caution tape. The row stencil joggers. If this hadn't happened, then this wouldn't have happened. And so a day uncoils and this spring vessel goes haywire in the sun. Humming a melody as I walk home so slowly that people ask me if I need help. Tell me what goes on in cramped submarines. Draw the curtains and stop aching so. Thanks for not turning it down. Brilliant juice. It is the people who remember, but when the people are gone, we won't have anyone to remember. People go to a lot of trouble to make things memorable. I would like to make things enjoyable by watching everyone and wondering what is going on. Today, I am as full of this day as the air in this apartment is full of particulate matter that sparkles off the highway. A sliver of the moon is still visible at midday. Reading the news is unbearable, but necessary. All exits are final, and all that. You can't eat the view. You can't eat the view, but you can plop down and refuse to move. My instincts are frequently off, but percolating anyway. So I'm right there with you. And this one is called Brooklyn, and it goes a little something like this. I know the song of the Cardinal, and it goes a little something like this. The trees in Brooklyn are the same color as cooked hamburger. Pangs twist a belly until it dawns, eat. The light in early December hurts my eyes. And yours? A chilled apple, a lit candle, and early blues. The smell of wormwood somewhere is making me think of Long Island City. What a person does on a Saturday is purposefully radiant and productive, if not a little self-centered and destructive. If a stroll under the Manhattan Bridge brings solace, go there. If a hat provides joy, they are sold all over the place. This is called How Do We Know Who People Are? You can ransack the coteries, bump and grind the protrusions, vent a lap with scissors, open the cantilevered blinds with a brash pull, pick the lock with a spit and a bobby pin, circle the wagons and develop a new butter, clothe the nudes in mosquitoes, sing from the roof at the top of your lungs in a city that is drawn to your song. Catch the water that drips off your body after a shower and distill it in denatured alcohol so people can catch a whiff of you. And by doing that, know themselves in the mirror of your smell. You can plop down, mint up, dole out, and take it on faith alone that the people you need to know about are alive, on a dot in the universe with you. Galaxy gas, otherwise known as Oscar Day. All it takes is galaxy gas to make the floor wobble while the wind does insane things to my mouth. What sort of caution is that showing? An envelope is floating above me. I am trying to fathom the thrill of winning. And while I'm at it, I'll buck up and bear fang to illustrate my robust constitution. I'm not double guessing or lobbing anyone over me. I have no trouble with people like they do on TV. I'm clear and concise as the shank of a boot, stomping on the point of a shovel into my shin. I can't wear nice shirts anymore. I don't even have a body anymore. This is called Watch the Film You Paid to See. In my bedroom, my weight is 3 times more than what I'd weigh on Jupiter. If your kitchen was on Mercury, I'd be heavier by half of you while sitting at your table. On Uranus, a quarter of my weight is meat, or an awareness of myself as flesh. On Venus, the light would produce a real volume around me that would make me look happy in photographs. This is how it is with quality and quantity in any life. It's a fact that on certain planets, I'd actually be able to mount the stairs 4 at a time. Think of the most beautiful horse in the world. A ridiculously beautiful golden horse with a shimmering coat. It would weigh no more than an empty handbag on Mars. You need to get real about these things. Ghost stories. My meager fodder was one excuse, my grab bag of excuses another. My status, except for the gray area, was sterling. My friends were all weekdays. For a gifted outfit, they would do anything. There was something savory and there was a fermented thing. It took so much to make a day then. We were happy. We were beautiful. We had a word with them and asked them to try and see us more clearly. They will always be reaching for clarity. When the smoke curled over the roof, we texted them with the details. Before the most thorough sunset got underway, that thing in me was near my brainstem. There was a period of doubt and confusion, but it was understood that it was that time to double down and dump it all on the floor and stomp on it until it became so creamy that people ended up really liking it and driving in from all over to obtain it. Future storms. Just checking my timing. Future storms. As you approach the resting spot, practice good footing. Once you find the stream, nestle next to it on your side. There you will feel an exquisite sense of listening intently to a low-frequency oscillating hum for hours on end. An interrupter is not well liked. Avoid a collision course with the fancy, but keep the emerald rods for hoarding. Remember, all days are ruthless and mathematical days. It is a fact that the city now speaks for itself and will no longer need your help articulating its story. Get something from the trunk and get involved. A spray mist and a lozenge deliver the expanded stance. A turkey vulture or some bird with wings wider than a Volkswagen engulfs you for the night. Disastrous consequences. If it's not too late, I would like to make big changes in nearly everyone by Wednesday. I am heading to the Tower of Fire. Do you understand what I'm saying? Human beings are awkward. They transmit complicated indicators when they try to do sensible things with the people around them. Some people find relief when they hold out a cup of red sugar water, and a hummingbird hovers and sips right over their hand. Your agency knows how to release you because you are still flesh at this stage. Joy Division did a wonderful cover of Sister Ray that peters out at the end. And I'm just going to read, I have just two and a half and a million poems. I have 2.5 million poems left. My understanding of this evening is rudimentary at best. It gets dark and people get batty. The people leaving the bar on Bergen Street amid an amplified vaulted bellow. People know how to make sound in the city. Perhaps it is good to be giddy and full of dread. And by giddy, I mean full of agitated wonder. Like maybe I can really get things done because I'm organized and nervous about everything. Then I get this very convincing idea that I'm a turd blossom, taking up too much space in my room. This is my understanding of this evening. And my final poem tonight is going to be, I think, you know what? I think I'm going to end this little set with, this is a test. You might have forgotten something. Perhaps you forgot something. Life makes things impossible. Everything is unbearable. It is good when things fail. Everything is working. The day is bright and brooding. The day is angular and sharp. The day is a shit show. It is harsh and irregular. There must be something beautiful here. People flip birds at you. People ask you to deliver things to their homes, and then they will flip birds at you. Birds flutter from their hands. You follow the rules governing chaos. You adhere to the rules governing civil behavior. People follow rules all the time, but it does not matter. Someone has to follow the rules, but it doesn't matter. I can see everything clearly now. Everything is clear. What I see is everything is here and it's clear. My fingers are shriveled from soaking in the light. My fingers are shriveled. My fingers are soaking in the light. Can you see where I'm waiting for you in a room? I'm waiting for you in a room. I assume you understand where I am. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Your poetry is elemental. It's precise, humorous, honest. It's inventive. You have such a vigorous voice, and there's always common sense. I mean, I just feel like I'm with you all along the way, and you're just such a wonderful storyteller. And in a way, your poems are songs, and there's always humanity in it. You know, it's just like, it reminds me of Horace's odes, the odes of Horace. You know, he would look at elemental things and see the wonder, the extraordinary in the ordinary, and you do that.
Oh, thank you.
And the clarity, you know, always have such clarity, and then all of a sudden there's this imaginative line that takes you, but it's things that we all feel and wonder about sometimes. Obviously, there's inventiveness. You bring things to us that we haven't thought about. But here's a big question for you.
Yeah.
What is poetry?
I think to me, it feels like it's a mode of consciousness that pervades my day-to-day life. And it's a way of taking in information and things and colors and impressions and stimuli. And it's what my five senses just crave to take in and then reorganize and have come out as words, poems, and breath.
Well, you are a very conscious writer, and yet you allow the unconscious to come in too with the lines. Do you rewrite much?
I do. I painstakingly go over them, and I read them aloud on my phone. So I tape record everything as I'm working on it. And so I also want to make sure that there's some sort of a music to it, and that I can hear it. And then I also have my partner, Tara. She will read my poems back to me, and I think sometimes hearing them in her voice without the biases that I would have in my own writing, and I can tell where it falters, and I can tell if she's tripping over something. It's not her fault. It's something in the way that I put the poem together. So yeah, I'm very aware of the audio version of it as well as the how it looks on the page. Yeah.
Well, that's evident, and that makes a lot of sense. Hearing the language and because I always feel too. I think it was Eliot that said that poetry is one person talking to another person, and I always get that feeling from you, that humanity that's within you. You're not up in the stratosphere sometimes, even though sometimes you take us there, but you always return us, return us to right here and now. What interests you about poetry outside of your own poetry? What interests you? What are you reading these days?
I just reread Annie B. Parson, a great choreographer who did the David Byrne show on Broadway. She was the choreographer for that. American, I'm blanking suddenly. But she wrote a book called Choreography of Everyday Life. And it's just so beautifully written about not only the movement, but walking through the city and that sort of like invisible sort of dance routine that we're all doing. And when somebody interrupts that dance routine, how corrupting it can feel to your sense of order in the universe. If somebody's walking in the wrong way or not paying attention or looking at their phone. But it's also largely about her son and her husband, and talking about the Odyssey, and hearing their overheard conversation about the Odyssey and this idea of heroes. And anyway, a thin little book, but so beautiful. It's really great. Annie B. Parson, she's awesome.
It sounds rhythmical too, the way she's moving through the city. Well, Alfred Kazan's Walker in the City, and Whitman. You always got the sense of him in the city. Ginsberg, among others.
Yeah.
But I noticed in your bio the visual and the art. What is the connection to you between the visual art and the poetry that you do?
I feel like there's never been any difference. It comes from the same sort of thing, the same hose, if I use a metaphor, and it's just a modulating whatever the spray is. But it comes from the same, for me somewhere. And sometimes it just demands words, and sometimes it demands imagery. And then also, I feel like a big part of my practice is also kind of being a little naughty, a little, putting words where they shouldn't be. I do graffiti sometimes, so sometimes just that sense of transgression is important to me in my creative practice. Not in some big transgressive, but just doing something that feels a little inappropriate, naughty, unexpected. And I do that very much in my visual art as well as in my poetry. So they do overlap.
Wasn't there a punk group, Naughty by Nature?
I think there was.
At least a phrase. But that's always good. You just have such great vitality. Tell us, most poets, at least many of the ones I know, teach in colleges. Tell us a little bit about how you make a living and what you do during a day, just any random day in your life.
Yeah. Well, I've been fortunate. I have taught at the Poetry Project a lot over the years. I was on the board there for years, and but right now I've been making my living. I'm very fortunately as an artist, and so I've been selling and making and showing enough that I can, I can get by. It's not that expensive up here in Northampton to have a studio, so that allows me to have a relatively large works area to work in. And every morning I walk the dog. I head into the studio. I'm usually there by 9:30 or 10 in the morning, and I get home around 7 o'clock at night, and I just make things all day. And that includes writing. I write there, but I'm also doing a lot of visual art there all the time, working on a series of collages right now. So, yeah.
Well, you just said maybe something that I was going to ask you about, collages. How do you let us know a little bit about your artwork? I mean, we've heard your poetry, which is great. What is the art that you do?
I feel like my current passion right now, because I keep these big black sketchbook notebooks that I have here for years. I've been keeping them. And so I just feel like it's my way of paying attention on the page. And I started thinking over the last couple of years, I wanted to sort of have the canvases be sort of as though they were living notebooks in some way, or representations of time passing, or a scrap of paper that I happen to have written on. And so I've been putting them on fairly large 20 by 30 canvases and making sort of collages that way. And then also sort of smaller wooden ones just from cut up children's books that I sort of am obsessed with the 1940s look of those books and then making them unrecognizable from their source. But it's just, and I feel like there's always like a third mind that takes over when I'm making collages. Like I'm just kind of going by the seat of my pants, and that feels right in the moment. And it's afterwards, so many times I'll stand back and look at it, and something in my mind was making some sort of pattern that I wasn't aware of. And these yellows kind of create this arc or whatever. And it's just those kind of surprises that where I have no hand or control over, and I'm willing it somewhat. I think those are those uncanny moments. I think I look for in both poetry and in art, and just sort of like where I stop and where the art or the poem begins. Is that liminal space is important to me.
Well, your poetry, one image just leads to another, and it just keeps unfolding in such a great way. I'm changing a little bit, but
Yeah.
Who did you study art with an artist, or you just do it all on your own?
I've always admired a lot of the New York artists that were affiliated with a lot of the New York schools. So Joe Brainerd has been somebody, Ray Johnson, who did a lot of those covers of those New Directions books, that Rimbaud book. Anyway, just a great, I would say, Amy Silman, who's a contemporary artist right now, who does both sort of cartoons as well as just incredible paintings. But I feel like I'm drawn to artists that say yes. And I was just having a conversation. I had a studio visit, and he was noticing I read a lot of Donald Judd, who I love, but he always makes me feel, he says no a lot, and he's so anal and so within a certain framework. And I feel like it's great for my own practice to read somebody like that, but I prefer artists that say yes, yes. And keep it open. Jack Whitten has a really great group of his notebooks that he wrote in the studio, a great painter that's no longer with us, that I read just for motivation a lot. There's a whole list of artists. Sigmar Polka.
I love Ray Johnson. Didn't he do How to Draw a Bunny?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was
a great documentary on him. He's walking across the avenue with a bag of groceries, and they fall, and he had a container of coffee, and that fell all over, and he says, "Coffee break."
Exactly. He's so. I think he really. He was so irreverent, and he used so many found materials and made everyday things and objects. Just from saddle shoes to whatever. He just knew how to do it. Yeah.
Well, you know how to do it too. You're so lively, and you have such a vigorous voice, and you're so inventive, and yet there's clarity, and you just don't go off the wall. I always follow everything that you do, and you're here on Earth, and then you take us outward sometimes into space, but then you always come back and keep the story going. So it's always a pleasure to have you on the show, Todd. I'm just so grateful for the great work that you do. So thank you once again, Todd Colby.
Thanks, Harry.
Our next poet, Joanna Penn Cooper, is the author of the books, The Itinerant Girl's Guide to Self-Hypnosis, Brooklyn Arts Press. What is a Domicile, Noctuary Press, and Crown, Ravenna Press, winner of the Catholimet Prize, as well as several chapbooks, including Comfort Event, a collection of collaborative poems with Todd Colby, published by Ethel. Joanna's poems have appeared in Poetry International, South Dakota Review, Vinyl, and the Academy of American Poets Poem a Day series, among other places. Joanna lives in Durham, North Carolina. Find her on Substack at Muse with JPC. Here's a wonderful poet, Joanna Penn Cooper.
Thank you. So thank you, Harry, for having me. And it's really nice to read with my talented friend Todd Colby. I have a selection of prose poems and lineated poems today, and I will start with one from, I have a collection as yet unpublished called When We Were Fearsome, and this is the one of the first poems in that collection, a prose poem. It's called Middle Age. She had had a child in middle age, a fact which, when she was pregnant, had caused her mother to exclaim, "It's like we're in a parallel universe." And it was true. It was like that, like another possible narrative leaking into the more familiar, more probable narrative of childlessness. Her son was now over a year old, and every day he exhibited more and more preferences, tendencies, and markers of his character. Some of these markers of character might persist into young adulthood, might be part of the person he would become, as had happened with her younger brother. One day he exhibited a preference not to listen to islands in the stream, but then he exhibited the quality of tolerating Jackson. She was still young enough that she could take him to the park and hold on to him as they went down a slide, then walk around behind him for 40 minutes as he walked in circles and toddled up to older children to screech at them with excitement. But she was not so young that this activity didn't make her fall into a deep sleep as soon as her son was asleep for the night. She would wake up 2 hours later, confused about whether to stay in bed or not, then get up and eat a little something. Occasionally, she would pick up a book of poems or short stories, then look up after a while to see that it had become much too late. Sometimes over the course of the day, the idea of strength would occur to her. She would think in a desultory way of the different kinds of strength or fortitude she could exhibit. Her idea was that it was a strength of character she needed now, but she thought about how physical strength and endurance would come in handy too. Then she thought about how in her mid to late 20s, she had experimented with becoming physically strong at various times. One memory was of being in a dim, small yoga studio in the 12th Street gym in Philadelphia and being led through a class that involved holding the crow pose for a long time. She balanced on her hands with her knees on her upper arms while a yoga instructor around her own age at the time talked about fortitude. But she can't remember how much emotional fortitude she actually felt at the time, despite being able to balance the weight of her entire body on her arms like that. She may have felt a sense of accomplishment, a shadow of youthful arrogance even, probably some hunger. Those classes always made her so hungry. This next one is a shorter prose poem called Come On. Mostly a person who walked around with a smile plastered on her face would be assumed to have something wrong with her, except maybe Carol Channing. Even so. In my town, certain people have obtained orange vests for the purpose of staying safe at intersections when they are begging. This is cheaper than feeding, clothing, or housing them. It has the added benefit of making them feel conspicuous. Some of us are men, some of us are women, sometimes we are metal or diamonds. We are all people, hungry and wanting. The more cheeky among us sometimes forget this. I no longer have favorites. Desire and delight and fatigue fade in and out like a scrim at a play your mother took you to. What is being hidden and what revealed is something I could ask myself. Two things I could ask. My toddler wakes up and walks to the living room to sit in a box, saying, "All aboard." Calling after his father in the morning, he says, "Be safe, don't be upset." He stops in the middle of breastfeeding to stick out his hand and say, "Nice to see you." And this one is a lineated poem, so it has line breaks. It's called Character Sonnet, and it's not a traditional sonnet. It's a sonnet in the sense of being a contemporary poem with 14 lines. Character Sonnet. The evening my mother took me to see Logan's Run was the same evening I stepped into the torn hem of my nightgown and tumbled down the stairs at university housing, then jumped up like Lazarus or Chevy Chase playing Ford. She says she didn't realize the movie would disturb me, the floating young adults zapped in Carousel, the oddly unsettling Farrah Fawcett cameo, Menace and Machines. This was supposed to be a sonnet about having to be too scrappy for my own good, wasting my scrappiness before I really needed it. But as my high school friend's father would say about most anything, it builds character. And it's true that I have character coming out of my ears, out of the holes in my clothes, character tumbling downstairs, jumping back up, watching in horror, living to tell. And this is a shorter poem with a long title. It's called Trying to Write a Poem While Reading the Children's Encyclopedia. And it has a quote at the beginning that says, mammals all have similar skeletons. The rib cage holds the tiger's lungs in place. In graduate school, I dated a large mammal who could fit my whole fist in his mouth, which I'll be honest was more fun than I'd had in a long time. I was a smaller mammal then, burrowing under the covers and dreaming when the large mammal would leave to play basketball with a poetry book in his back pocket. Some meat for your trouble. The brain is very plastic, the woman says on the podcast. Everything changes it. Anger, yes, but also taking a walk or a deep breath or reading a book. It's a learning machine. I visualize dancing on my drive back home, and I change my brain into the brain of someone who dances in her mind as she drives. A woman writes a book about how she knew she was an animal when the hot flashes burned the rest of the bullshit away. I knew I was an animal when cells implanted in my uterus and grew into another, when the nurse pushed in the fluids and I felt a sea change before suddenly vomiting. My body did that without me. Someone sends me Christ as a tiger with meat for a heart. It's true, the tiger has meat for a heart, but so do I. And this one is called How Wondrous Strange to Be in a Body. It's a little bit longer. You might as well know, my son says, while looking at a transforming robot, that his legs open up. He flips open compartments on the thighs, revealing nothing. Later, I sit on a camping chair in the backyard after the 2 irises have bloomed, but before the mosquitoes have come out for the year. I blow bubbles for him and he chases them with a metal spoon. Make more villains, he cries. I'm wheezing like the dying mother from my life as a dog. Mine is only a newly hatched asthma, pollen. Though come to think of it, once as a teenager, I complained about something to my mother, saying that I was going to die. She said, yes, you are. Might as well know. Who are you? This light, these leaves, happy shrieks of children carried on breeze, morning doves calling, leaf shadows, whatever poor spirit is trapped in the myrtle. On the walk to preschool, I'm telling my son how some people plan their flowers for maximum blooming, spacing out the daffodils, the irises, the rose. He asks if we can tap trees for sap sometime. I think he saw it on PBS. I tell him that happens mostly in the northeastern United States, New England it's called. I'm imagining he hasn't been there, but he was an embryo there. In Vermont, the woman who wants to practice her sound balancing, she has me lie in the meditation hut while she taps at tuning forks over my chakras. She says that something is stuck in my second chakra, a blockage. Tapping, tuning in, kneeling over my pelvis. Then I feel a whoosh and she falls back on her heels. After that, the implantation happens. I notice the spotting, putting it together later. I don't tell my son this on our walk. He stands up from his stroller to adjust the stuffed cloth tail he's pinned to the back of his pants, blue with white spots. So that one is about, I was at Vermont Studio Center actually when I found out that I was pregnant, and I swear it sort of took when someone practiced this sound balancing on me, which involves what I said, sort of tapping tuning forks over the various chakras. So my son had that power of making her fall back on her heels. So I have a few more, maybe 3 more These are from a chapbook that my friend Sarah Lefsick, who did the recent chapbook of Todd's, did for me. It's called Wild Apples. It's a flash memoir collection with writing prompts. So some of these I originally wrote as prose poems, but I'm calling them all flash memoir here. So this one is called Small Animal Needs. The small child gets angry about my anger at bedtime and tells me I am a waste on a woman. He's tired. He's testing the language, how to weaponize the available words. Women, he has learned, should be pleasant. I'm not sure what I expected. Once I imagined this life or something close to it, a visiting assistant professor in Milwaukee scraping ice off my windshield at 7:30 in the morning, I wondered what the opposite of living alone in the Rust Belt would be. A housewife in Raleigh? I didn't want that, but was trying to imagine something safe and innocuous, a daydream I didn't want. I should have known, given my wonky powers, that my vision would appear, but skewed. Next door to Raleigh, semi-comfortable, semi-provided for before I left again. A beautiful woman becomes a ghost, writes a male poet in a poem I read online. Here's how you test such a sentence. Does her beauty, nationality, ethnicity, social class really tell us anything about her character? No? Then why is your adjective there? Here, it's meant to elicit pathos. She is beautiful. That beauty is missing from the world, how we suffer for its loss. Another story. A beautiful young woman smokes a bunch of pot one night and walks across a 4-lane highway with her little girl to the nearest rundown grocery store. Maybe she's out of tampons. When the woman and child get there, they realize why they never come to this store, especially at night. It is white and scuffed and fluorescent inside, purgatory as a Kubrick movie. They turn down an aisle and see a rat scurrying across the far end. They find the night manager and report the sighting. He looks them up and down. Inside the woman's beauty is something staunch, an unsettling self-assurance in a poor girl from student housing. Even more unsettling, her little girl has the same quality. Her pigtails are askew, her clothes are secondhand, but she looks somehow knowing. He tells them, no, that couldn't have happened. They're not there to witness, but to be witnessed. So let's see, I have a couple more. I wanted to read, here's one about going back to my teenage years. It's called Bauhaus, which is the name of a band. When I was a teenager, I knew a thing or two. I stayed in my room being skinny and having bangs, listening to Bauhaus and lifting 3-pound weights. I drew pretty good portraits of my own face. I learned to drive stick, and I would drive farther out into the suburbs to go to the mall and walk around drinking Dr. Pepper and chewing candy and being mildly disgusted with all the people who seemed to be sinking of their own accord. On the way there, I'd look for the Eagles on the radio in order to demonstrate that the Eagles are always on the radio, and to further demonstrate that, for good or bad, my vocal range exactly matched that of one Don Henley. On the way back, I would listen to Heart or Fleetwood Mac, which reminded me of my childhood in the 70s, a time of honest belting and bad vibes. Boys at school would talk to me in class, and I guess I would just look at them or say something weird about the sorrows of young Werther or something, because after a while they'd get nervous and blurt out, I guess that's how people dress in Europe. Then we'd both turn around and class would start. And one more. Let's see. I wanted to read. I'll end with another one that goes further back in time. This one is called I Am 9. I'm sitting on a brown couch at 10 a.m. I'm wearing tube socks and a rayon nightgown with the lace trim half torn off by my foot. Or I'm wearing my Bob Dylan t-shirt nightgown that Paul brought me last time. I like how Bob Dylan's hair sticks out all around. It's spring. My mother is sleeping. She hung crystals in the windows, and this is the time of day when the sun hits the crystals and sends bits of light onto the wood floor and the dust. We don't live in the house anymore. We live in an apartment. We don't have cats and a dog anymore, but we have plants. I bring my knees up to my chest and pull the nightgown over them, and from that position look through a book of circus freaks. I study Jojo the dog-faced boy and feel a tugging kinship. I'm not lonely. I don't think about TV. I don't think about when my mother will wake up. When Lisa Boer comes to the door, I tell her I can't play. She gets really mad, almost as mad as a person can get. She tells me she hopes I rot in there and stomps down the stairs. I close the door and make a glass of strawberry quick. I sit on the floor with my glass. I study the bits of light and the floating bits of dust. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Joanna. I love that last poem. It's luminous. Your poetry is sagacious, humorous. It's joyful. You know, the mother-son theme is just, it's complex, and there's always gold writing about family, right? And you have such narrative strength. You're just such a wonderful storyteller, and I have a son too, and I wrote a lot of poems about him when he was growing up. So I love those poems, and the complexity, as I said, of not just the joy of motherhood, but what that relationship is, what happens to both of the people in that. Well, when did you write your first poem?
My first poem ever?
Yep.
I'm not sure. I remember writing poems in high school. I remember writing, I got an honorable mention for a haiku in 5th grade. I remember being annoyed that I didn't get a better ribbon. One of my early writing memories is being in a closet in the house that we had when I was maybe 8 years old, and my mother had given me a manual typewriter, and I had it on a TV tray, and I set that up as my office. And I remember I wrote a newspaper, and I made up the articles, and I found that very satisfying. I felt this, sense of kind of agency and purpose that I really enjoyed. So those early glimmers of purpose, I think, are really nice.
Working on a typewriter when you're 8, that's pretty early. I remember I grew up in Nebraska, and I took a typing class in high school. I was the only boy in the class in the 50s, but I was always glad I learned to type. Who were some of the poets who influenced you before you started to write in a serious, regular way?
I have my gateway poets, I think, that a lot of people have. I loved, those people that first introduce you to the idea of poetry and maybe sort of the drama of poetry. In high school, I liked Edna St. Vincent Millay sonnets, just the voice, the idea of sort of that living voice coming through, I loved. And I remember liking, E.E. Cummings, and Stephen Crane has some poems that are very dramatic. There's one about somebody squatting, eating their heart or something. And I remember just being very struck by that as a teenager. And then as I got a little older and I was introduced to, contemporary poetry, I was first introduced to Lee Young Lee and Sharon Olds, and I went to graduate school originally to be a literary scholar. I was sort of deciding between taking the creative path and the more scholarly path, and I ended up going for a PhD in literature, and it did kind of take me away from my creative mind to some extent for a while. You do so much reading and so much sort of assessing of literature according to this, specific lens that it has its conventions and its rigidity to it that sort of took me away from my creative mind. And I remember in the 90s when Marie Howe has a collection called What the Living Do, and I bought that. And it's sort of prosy, and it's very autobiographical, as my poems tend to be. And it kind of reintroduced me to the idea of what a poem could be and do. And so I think that was part of, beginning to write again. But I've always had other favorites like Robert Hayden and James Wright and some of the deep image sort of poets as well.
You mentioned working on your PhD. Did you get your PhD? And if you did, where at what college did you get it from?
I did. I did a PhD in English and in American literature, and I wrote about fiction from Temple University. And what I ended up writing about doesn't really connect to my, what I write about personally. But it's some, I wrote about fiction from the turn of the 20th century and the way that American realism from that time has these glimmers of the uncanny or the Gothic, and how it's a way of working out sexual and racial tensions after the Civil War. And so I became very interested in, kind of Americana and these discursive threads that have to do with sexual and racial anxiety, and then just kind of jumped away from that for a while and became a poet. But it's interesting and surprising how relevant some of what was being talked about in the 19th century still is today. It's these are questions that are still being debated and revived, like who's a proper American? What does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to be a man or a woman? These are all questions that for some reason are still being debated, I think, in our society now.
And you read some poems that were prose poetry, and my late wife, Holly Prado, she was an excellent prose poet writer. Why? Could you just talk a little bit about the prose poem as opposed to the traditional poem?
The prose poem, I think in the United States, it tends to be associated with kind of a thread of the absurd and of humor, and there's some wit to it. And I think that, whether you're reading James Tate or Russell Edson, there's that appeal of that voice that can come through in a prose poem. And so for me, I think it was also a way to bring together my interests in the poetic in terms of having like this smaller portrait of a piece of life or a moment in time, but also my interest in these almost sort of novelistic or short story like voices that I also appreciate. And so I'm kind of like bringing together that condensed quality, but also that emphasis on voice. And you don't need a prose poem to have an emphasis on voice, as Todd's poetry shows you, but that's how it worked out for me.
When you sit down to write a poem, what kicks it off for you? Is it an idea, an image, an emotion? What is it that is behind that entrance into your poem?
Sometimes it's walking around, sort of like what Todd was saying about walking around and just sort of taking in the world and, filtering all of this, beauty and lack of beauty and the absurd and the sublime and trying to kind of figure out how it all goes together and then finding a container for it. Other times for me, it will involve a phrase popping into my mind and kind of appreciating the musicality of that phrase and then building a scene around that or some sentences around that. I'm kind of getting back to this, but I used to keep a lot of notebooks and I would write down resonant phrases that occurred to me of just things that, were happening in my life and organized in certain language and then kind of spin a poem around those.
Todd, why don't you come on? We have a few minutes left and you each can talk a little bit about each other's poetry. Why don't you, Joanna, say a few things since you've been talking with me and about Todd's poetry. We have 4 minutes left, and then Todd say a couple of things about your poetry. Joanna?
So Todd is a friend of mine from when I first moved to New York, when I took a postdoc at Fordham, and I think we met in 2009. And I remember seeing Todd read at a friend's loft apartment. She had a reading series there, and the energy of the poems and that voice and that sort of like specific Todd charisma that comes out was very interesting to me and appealing to me. And I remember we struck up this friendship and we would email each other. And then after a while, we started writing collaborative poems and we would email each other lines. And I think I had just finished I did my MFA after my PhD. And when I first went into the MFA, I thought I would be this kind of like, rarefied lyric poet. But from Todd, I think I learned to let the humor of my voice come out. And so writing those collaborative poems with Todd really help develop my own particular voice, interestingly. So I really value my friendship and that kind of what it sparked in me creatively, and, how Todd just kind of emits that sort of creativity that inspires other people, I think.
That's great. Todd?
Yeah, I feel like when I first met Joanna, I was intimidated because she had such a rigorous academic background, and I dropped out of 2 MFA programs and never did the whole academic thing too well. And just her, not just her academic rigor, but the intense way she reads and explores things, and always sort of has some sort of passion and moving it along with her own practice as a writer. And I also I appreciate her. Her autobiographical telling of her life, but it's done in such a particular way with her language and the things that she notices. And I feel like that's just sort of it's difficult. It sounds easy to do, but it's really difficult to sort of nudge aside something and have a certain voice like she has and write about something so deeply personal, about being a mother in these uncanny moments with a son, or just being a human being walking around. And they always sort of make me chuckle in a way that isn't like a ha-ha laugh, but it's like a nervous laugh. It's a laughter of recognition, of a simpatico, if you will, that I feel when I read her work. And I'm also very happy a lot of times that if I'm just, especially during the pandemic or just walking around and just knowing that she's out there too, creating and making and doing. And there's like a sort of a small roster of people in my life that it makes me happy knowing they're on the planet with all the other crap that's going on and the nightmarish things. There's just somebody else looking and observing and taking it in and celebrating it in some way. And she's one of those people for me. So.
You people are, both of you, Todd and Joanna, are part of, this ongoing show we've done. This is our 222nd show since COVID hit in March 2020 here at MPTF, and you've blessed us with your humanity. What you see. It's not out there some, foreign sound. It's really something we all identify with, and we hear you, and you really. You take us out there, but your feet are on the ground, and there's so much knowledge between both of you, and the music and the complexity of the relationships that, Joanna talked about, and what you see, Todd, and on your everyday walking and on and on. And so thank you once again for such a wondrous reading. It really lifts me up, and I'm so thankful for both of you to be on the show. So thank you, Joanna Penn Cooper and Todd Colby. And before we go, they have a next show coming on. Next Tuesday, Corinne Conley, Kay Wiseman, and John Talley, all marvelous actors, will read from Alexander Pushkin's selected poetry. And Pushkin, as you know, is considered to be Russia's greatest writer, even greater than Tolstoy or Dostoevsky. He's like their Shakespeare. So we'll hope you'll join with us. And that's our show. Joanna Penn Cooper, Todd Colby, thank you.